Okay, we're going to get started now. So first, we would like to say thank you to the Selective Mutism Association for all of their programming, especially for our programming today on using fun to override the fear, the pivotal role of fun during caregiver-led exposures. I will briefly introduce myself, then my colleagues will introduce themselves, and you'll have the chance to hear from all of us today. My name is Takira Ward, and I am a research assistant at the Human Emotions Research Lab and Mental Physical Health and Behavior Lab at George Mason University, a crisis counselor for the Crisis Text Line, and a frequently returning counselor to the Confident Kids Camp DC Metro for Selective Mutism.
Great, and my name is Chloe Levin, and I'm a clinical social worker with Every Mind, which is a mental health nonprofit organization in Maryland. And in my current role, I serve as a child and family therapist for elementary age children and their families. And I'm also a returning counselor and teacher from the Confident Kids Camp, Selective Mutism Camp.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay Scharfstein. I'm the director of the Rockville Therapy Center, which is a small private practice in Rockville, Maryland, where I specialize in selective mutism, social anxiety, and tics and Tourette's. And I'm also the director of the DC Metro area Confident Kids Camp that we offer during the summer and sometimes mid-year.
We would also like to say thank you to the Gordon and Marilyn Macklin Foundation, who has made this presentation possible today. For our learning objectives for today, we will first review some components that help make exposure effective for selective mutism. We will talk about adding speaking exposures to fun activities. Then we will talk about how to add fun exposures to not so fun activities, as well as go over some common troubleshooting issues that may arise during speaking and interactive exposure activities.
And feel free to put your questions in the chat. We will save time at the end to address the questions. Well, let's jump in. Because selective mutism is an anxiety disorder that's associated with speaking anxiety, exposures or approach tasks really refer to directly confronting and engaging with fear while practicing speaking in social situations. So the goal is not to make kids and teenagers feel nervous, but really to get the benefits of contact with something that they've been afraid of. And there are so many benefits. So it really helps to break that anxiety and avoidance cycle. It helps to gradually reduce anxiety while in the presence of the fear. It increases active coping rather than avoidant coping with anxious feelings. And having a data point of I just faced my fear by ordering ice cream at the ice cream shop really does help to motivate to increase opportunities to do even more exposures and face even more fears. And it really does help to distinguish between real danger and anxiety false alarms. Anxiety is what I feel, it's not a fact. And being in contact with exposures really does help send that message. And we know that caregivers are just so important in the support network for kids and families with selective mutism. And in particular, having caregivers participate in exposures and lead them supports natural speech in everyday situations at the restaurant that you typically go to, your grocery store, at family gatherings and birthday parties. And it helps generalize skills from a therapy office into real life environments where speaking is most important. And it's very powerful for kids and teens to have the experience of parents being involved because it conveys the message, I know this is scary and I have every confidence that you can handle it. And of course, providing tools for parents and caregivers to support their kids. So why fun? Why not have fun? This is scary stuff. It's really hard to work on facing your fears. So having fun increases the chances of creating stronger relationships, of being able to pair something that is really scary with something that is really pleasurable. It's so much easier to talk when I get ice cream at the end, or go to the dentist when there's a lollipop at the end. So really being able to override that amygdala activation, that fight, flight, or freeze response that comes with anxiety, and pair it with something that feels pleasurable. And there is research that shows that expressive therapies, those that include drama or art or play, do decrease anxiety and increase spontaneous speech in selective mutism. And it's much easier to engage and makes it more enjoyable and interesting when there is the element of fun. When considering exposures, you do want to really think about structure. We want your child and teen to know exactly what to expect so that they know if they completed it or if not. And it's success oriented. So thinking about identifying just right goals, something that's just a little bit above their current ability. And we put some ideas here for different categories of treatment goals. And as we go through the presentation, we'll have very specific outline of what could be potential goals for each opportunity. So maybe you're thinking about increasing volume from lower to louder, increasing speech length from just a word to several more words or full sentences, answering not only forced choice questions, but open-ended ones, initiating speech and being the first one to get the conversation started, and then increasing the size of the group that speech takes place, and always including a reward system, because we want to work on that dopamine response, that really feel-good hormone that celebrates the successes in exposures.
As we go through the presentation, we would like for you to adapt the material that we present as needed based on your child's age, ability, what's socially appropriate in that setting with individuals, and what feels in line with cultural values. These are some questions that we would like for you to keep in mind throughout the presentation. How is playfulness perceived and valued among different social cultural groups? When is it appropriate for children and teens to speak or to remain silent? And what ways can we adapt exposures to be respectful of both cultural and social expectations?
So important to do because there's many pieces in the environment that play a role. And we want to share some tools. So as you're thinking about the exposures in a few minutes, we've got some different ways to visually present the information and to communicate with your child or teen during the exposure. So a hierarchy or communication ladder is really a way to identify least anxiety-provoking situations all the way up to most anxiety-provoking. And it helps to identify where to start. So if it's too easy, it's going to take forever. But if it's too hard, it's going to lead to a setback. So building that ladder of speaking situations really helps things to work at a good pace. And we've got our rating scale. So kids and teens know all about emojis, and it's a way to communicate how they're feeling. So during and before and after the exposure, these rating scales can help to convey how strong the anxiety was when thinking about ordering at the ice cream shop while there, and how do you feel after knowing that you just completed it. You'll always want to make sure that you anchor the scale so that the child and teen know what you're thinking of. For older individuals, maybe it's a 1 through 5 scale. For teens, it could be 1 through 10, 1 through 100. And younger kids, we often do a 1 through 3 scale. So it's easy, medium, hard, least, most, or medium, anxiety provoking. And anchoring the scale with some information about what 1 means if it's at home eating ice cream, 10, chased by a bear, and being able to use all those numbers throughout. And I cannot take any credit for this slide. This was my colleague, Chloe, who had a lot of fun putting this together. But this is going to show how we are going to start by talking about fun activities or fun, enjoyable places that you and your families go, and different ways to add exposures. And then we're going to get into task zone, those not so fun places for many kids and teens, and how we can add some fun into it. First, starting with adding exposures to fun places, and keep in mind the top tips. Come prepared with a specific plan, have a plan B as a backup, get your reward ready to go. And for teens and older children, consider whether they want you there or not. And if they want to have your voice involved, or if you just want to communicate with technology. So Chloe's going to get started with our first example.
All right, so as we saw on our little game board map, we are entering the fun zone. So we have 3 examples over the next 3 slides that we want to walk you through. And we've grouped some different fun locations that you might go with your child into categories. So our first category is fun outings. For this slide, we're focusing our example on if we're spending the day at the zoo, but feel free, as Takira mentioned, to adapt any of the examples that we talk about to other places that you might go with your child. So we're hoping that with our example here, it's something that you would be able to implement at a variety of locations and with a variety of different age children, and regardless of their abilities with selective mutism. So for example, we are going with a classic. If you've used any kind of fun exposures with your child before, you might be familiar with scavenger hunts. They're so great for using with kids who are practicing their speech because it's a fun, interactive way to get them to practice speaking to new people without it feeling like a task. So our goal here is that we want our child to practice asking questions to new adults. Lindsay mentioned it's really important to have a clear structure so that your child knows exactly what's expected of them during this activity. So you might have a plan that as the parent or caregiver, your job is going to be to get the attention of the workers at the zoo. And then your child's task is to ask 1 question to maybe 5 workers. And an example might be, what does this animal eat? So as you may know, when working with anxiety especially, it's really important to limit the variables that we're changing. When we're introducing a new speaking goal for our child, we want to limit the number of other variables that we're changing. So in this case, we have the variable that's changing is who the child is speaking to. So each time they're going to be talking to a new adult, but we're keeping the question the same. That makes the task feel less challenging and your child's more likely to succeed. Make sure that you are nearby in case you need to step in if there's any unplanned questions, which we know happens often when overeager guests or people in public are excited to meet your child and want to know what's their name, what's their age, have they ever been to the zoo before. Make sure that you're at the ready to step in because that's not the goal here. The goal is asking our pre-planned question. Of course, you want a reward that you've spoken with your child about so that they know what's coming and they're excited about it. And we have heard feedback from many families, that have teens where they're kind of wondering, how do I adapt this and engage my older child? So one way that you could adopt a scavenger hunt with a teen is maybe you're going to text them the animal emojis of the animals that you want them to find. And then if they choose that they don't want you right next to them during the activity, maybe they're going to text you back the information that they learn about what the animal eats. So as mentioned, adapt any of these regardless of the location. For teams and clubs, this is another fun, hopefully fun activity that your child might engage in. And here we have a new goal for our child to work on. So instead of speaking with new adults, our goal is going to be to ask peers questions. Another selective mutism favorite is friendship bingo, and you might be familiar with regular bingo, where the goal is to kind of cross off all of the boxes on your bingo sheet. In friendship bingo, your goal is to find a friend or peer who matches every item on each box. So in this case, our structure is that you as the caregiver want to step in and make sure that the coach or the leader of the club knows that you might need some extra time before or after practice. We don't want to put that pressure on our child to get that permission. Your child's goal would be to ask one question to each teammate or peer, and then cross off the bingo box once they ask. So they might go up to a peer and say, "Do you have a sibling?" or "Are you in 3rd grade?" And then they could either write their answer or just cross off the box that they asked that question. With teens, we're thinking about teens love those fun games like Would You Rather. So maybe you're creating the bingo board with your teen ahead of time and coming up with some fun Would You Rather questions. And again, use of cell phones can be helpful here. If they're a little embarrassed to be walking around with a bingo board, maybe they're recording their responses on their phone. So our third category for these fun zone tasks is going to be gatherings. So this is things like birthday parties, if your family has a holiday gathering, or play dates with friends. And here our goal is going to be to speak in front of a group. So one idea you might try during gatherings is to have your child lead a game at the gathering. As always, as the caregiver, you're going to have a role in this. So in this case, it could be helpful for you to step in and invite others at the gathering to play the game, because our goal here is not necessarily for your child to be initiating play with others. That's a separate goal. Instead, their focus is just speaking in front of the group. So you might gather everyone, and then your child's task could be to explain the game rules to everyone in the group. I've put here on the screen an example of sort of a visual cue that could be helpful for your child to have with them at the gathering, or you might just use this when you're practicing with your child of what they're going to say and how they're going to explain the game. So we have a simple first, next, and last structure, and your child and you can work together to decide first, what does everyone need to know about how to play the game, next, and last. And you can come up with some fun rewards that would be accessible at the birthday party or the play date, and that, of course, your child is excited about. So for teens, we know sometimes board games, they might not be as invested. So get creative with it. You can have them explain the rules to a video game, maybe a TikTok challenge, or an app that they really enjoy on their phone. And just remember, if your child is maybe not ready yet to say first, next, last in front of a whole group, but you really want them to practice this skill of speaking in front of a group, you can adapt this task. So for example, maybe you plan that your child will say first in front of the group, and then you'll start the sentence. We each get, and your child could complete it, 7 cards. So you can support your child in the moment if that's the level that they're at. Don't feel like any of these tasks have to be too advanced for your child. You can adapt as needed.
Here's some possible solutions to potential things that could go wrong as you practice these fun exposure activities with your child. For the first fun activity, we went over fun outings and used the example of the scavenger hunt at the zoo. Something that can happen while on a fun outing is that your child may freeze up or shut down when it comes time to ask the question to the adult. And in this scenario, it would be the zookeeper at the zoo. Something that you can do in order to troubleshoot this scenario is you can step aside with the child and you can do a warm-up, which involves rehearsing the question that the child came up with prior to getting to the zoo. As you do the warm-up with the child, it's very good to give the child encouragement and reassurance because they've already come to the zoo, which is a fun outing, but also keeping in mind that they're doing an exposure activity. It's very loud, it can be chaotic, and it can be very overstimulating and overwhelming for the child to do an exposure activity and that type of setting. So just reassuring that, hey, they have this and that they'll be able to get through the exposure and have fun as well can just be really encouraging and reassuring for the child. Another thing that can happen when they're in a fun outing is that the child can have so much fun that they forget or no longer want to participate in the exposure. For example, if they're at the zoo, you may find yourself chasing the child from the kangaroo exhibit to the elephant exhibit to the flamingos, and you're just trying to get a hold of them to have them do the exposure, but they're just having so much fun from all the overstimulating stimulation of all of the animals. And so what you can do is you can step aside with the child and give them a quick reminder and let them know that, hey, we're gonna speak first and then we're gonna play. And so once you ask this nice zookeeper over here your question about the elephants, then we can go play and look at all the exhibits before we go. For the next fun activity, we talked about teams and clubs. Something that could go wrong is that the child could be playing the game with their peers, but they're not loud enough for everyone playing, let's say friendship bingo as we used, to hear them. So this is a very common thing that happens with selective mutism where they're speaking, but their volume is very low and others can't really hear them. So what you can do is first you can ask the child to repeat what they said. And if the volume is still low, you can reflect and praise and repeat it loudly so that others will know that the child did respond. And as you're playing the game, just try to use similar terminology as the child are in the game. So that way it can help the child feel comfortable with the game language that's happening and have everyone around them have a higher volume as well when speaking so that eventually, hopefully the child can start speaking louder and they'll all be using the same language and sound volumes throughout playing the game. For the third fun activity, it was gatherings. A scenario that would involve troubleshooting for this would be that the child is getting away with not speaking when it comes time to explain the game rules during a game because others are familiar with the game. What happens here is the child pretty much blends in with others because everybody knows how to play the game. They don't really give the child the chance to explain the instructions because they already know it. And so how to prepare the child for this, it could be the setting that's making them uncomfortable and they're also playing with new people that they're not familiar with. You can prepare the child to play in an uncomfortable setting or a setting that makes the child anxious by maybe practicing at home and having a family game night leading up to when the child's going to play this game in an uncomfortable, unfamiliar setting. And so while they're practicing the game and playing it in a comfortable setting, such as their home with their family, you can have them read the rules and teach the rules to everyone that's playing the game. And then that way, when they get into this unfamiliar setting, they'll already have the knowledge of how to explain and play the game before they play in an unfamiliar setting. Another thing that you can do is that you can create index cards with common game phrases that you would play in the game, such as my turn or your turn if the child doesn't feel comfortable with speaking while they're playing the game in that setting. And then hopefully as the game goes on, the child will stop using the cards or read the cards as they use them. And so that way they can continue being exposed to the exposure therapy. And so another thing that could also go wrong is that the child is noticing that their peers aren't playing the game correctly and they're too afraid to interrupt them. So when you're playing the game at home in the comfortable setting, you can purposely not play the game correctly and show the child how you would approach that and interrupt another player in the game. And you can say, hey, I think according to the instructions, we're supposed to play this way. Or when let's say you're playing Uno, when you put out the +4 card, the next player is supposed to draw the 4 cards and not the person who put in the card. So just teaching the child how to interrupt peers while they're playing in that comfortable setting. So that way, when they get in those anxious settings, they're familiar with it and they already have the background having fun, playing with their family in comfortable settings, and they can bring all those tools and techniques into these anxious settings.
Great. And we saw that there was a question that came through about some of those shutdowns that are so common. So hopefully, as you hear some of the troubleshooting that Takira shares, it gives you some ideas. We'll share additional troubleshooting for these next few task activities as well. So we're going to move into our task zone. So we moved through the fun stuff, which already it kind of gives you a leg up because your child is probably excited to go to the zoo or excited for soccer practice. But we all know that there are some times where maybe our child is not so excited because these are just tasks that we have to get done. Maybe we're not even that excited to do them. So our top tips here are, as before, plan ahead and bring any materials or rewards that you need to be successful in your exposure. Always have a plan B as a backup. And then for our teens or older children, we're thinking about maybe introducing some friendly competition, which we'll give you some examples of. And as before, using technology if that's something that your teen is interested in. So appointments are such a common task that we have to do with our children. And I personally do not like going to the doctor or dentist myself. So if I already have anxiety going into the appointment and I know that I might be expected to speak, that can be really challenging. And you might just think, you know what, it's easier. I'm not going to challenge my child in this situation. Let's just get through the appointment. But there are some fun ways that you can use these as great opportunities for your child to practice those social skills that are so important. So one idea we're calling the Secret Mission Challenge. And so the goal here might be that you want your child to practice using social niceties, which we mean saying things like please, thank you, goodbye, hello, nice to meet you. So before you go to the appointment, you can talk with your child about their secret mission and make a list of some of those social nicety words that you want them to practice in the appointment. Make sure that they practice saying each of those in the comfort of your home beforehand so that they know how to pronounce the words and when would be an appropriate time to say them. And then during the appointment, you can assign your child their secret mission, which is to try to say each one of those words that you planned with them at least once during your appointment. And your child can earn a point or a sticker, or you could pop a bubble on their Pop-It toy or Pop-It bracelet with them during the visit each time as a fun way to keep track of their progress. A reward might be making a fun stop on the way home. And then we mentioned that friendly competition. So maybe with your teen, you're going to compete sort of with or against them at the appointment to see if you can also complete that secret mission and say all of those words. Eating out is another really common scenario that we hear from parents and caregivers, that it's really hard to get our children to order for themselves and use their words when in a restaurant. So a fun way to challenge your child when eating out is to sort of make it into a game. And so we're going to be doing Eating Out Pictionary Edition for our example. So our goal, once again, is to order food at the restaurant. We have a very clear goal that our child knows ahead of time. You might need to step in as a parent or caregiver to request that extra time from the waiter or waitress so that you have time to warm up with your child and play the game before the ordering happens. It's really important that you think ahead and plan for the amount of time that you know your child might need. The Pictionary component comes in because it will help your child to feel more comfortable, get playful, while also practicing what they're going to say. So maybe you play a game of Pictionary where you guess what each of you wants to order, and they can practice saying that order out loud. When the waiter arrives, you can decide if your child should order for you or if you want them to order for themselves. For some kids, even though it can sound like a bigger challenge for them to order for you, it actually sort of takes the pressure off of them because it feels like the attention is not on them, even though they're still the ones talking. So maybe your child is holding the picture that they drew or that you drew as their cue card, and then they could say something like, "My mom wants the burger and salad." They can get to order something special from the menu as their reward for completing the task. And then for teens and any child, you can decide if maybe it makes more sense age-wise for them to order for themselves when the waiter comes.
Our final not so fun task is running errands. Usually running errands involves some type of to-do list or shopping list. And in this example, we're going to be using a shopping list. The fun interactive exposure technique that we're going to be using is playing Simon Says while going on a grocery store trip. The goal of the exposure is to try to teach a child how to get an adult's attention when they're out at these places running errands and how to advocate for their needs or something that they may need in these settings. So in order to play the game, the parent or caregiver will be Simon, and their role is to give the child speech-focused tasks to do that's based on the shopping list. And so, for example, they may say, Simon says, say, excuse me to the store clerk and ask them where the apples are. Or they may say, Simon says, ask the cashier where you can find the bread. So these are examples of things that the parent will say to the child, and then the child would do these tasks, and it would teach a child how to interrupt these store clerks or wherever they are in order to help find the items that they would need in everyday settings when you're running errands. The reward for this could be that you can allow the child to pick out something near the register or give them a budget of choice, and then they can pick out anything they would like within that budget, or they can get something from the gumball machine if they still have those around in the stores. In order to adapt this to teens, you can take a comical turn on this, where you can play assignment, as the teen can play assignment, and then on the shopping list, you can play assignment and assign each other different tasks that require speech. And this is a very fun or interactive way to play with the teens as well. And of course, you would be asking different store clerks and not the same one over and over again. And so this will bring a little bit more fun and exposure with the older kids when playing Simon Says in somewhere such as a grocery store running errands. For the first not so fun activity that we had, it involved going to appointments. So something that can happen when you go to an appointment is that the child may start using nonverbal pleasantries, such as just waving and not saying goodbye. Or if they're at a doctor's appointment, the doctor will ask what's wrong, and they'll point to their knee instead of saying, oh, my knee's hurting. Or if they're at the nail salon, the nail tech will ask them, which color would you want for your nails? And instead of saying the color, they'll just point to the yellow nail polish. And so something that you can do in order to troubleshoot this is you can bring a technology into this. So they have apps where you can have different background settings of different places, and you can involve some type of play therapy or imaginative therapy, and you can have those settings up of the doctor's office, the dentist's office, and places that would involve some type of appointment where the child would have to interact with the professional. And you can also, if you don't want to do the app, or you can have the app up, you can also create these scenes in your home or whichever comfortable setting that the child is comfortable in, and you can play as the professional, the child can play as the client, and you guys can both do both roles, and then you can ask the common questions that are in those settings, so that way the child is familiar with it, they reviewed it, so when you go to these different places, they'll already know their answers and how to respond and interact with that professional in those settings. Eating out can be very tricky because when they get there, they have this long menu, and then a waiter or waitress comes up and asks them what they want. They don't know this waiter or waitress, and they're here and this new setting. And so something that's very common is that the child would look at you to order instead of them ordering themselves. And something that you can say first is, oh no, my ears stopped working. You have to tell this friendly waiter or waitress, what do you want, until my ears start working again. So that's letting the child know that this is the time that they're going to have to practice this exposure and to order for themselves. And so in order to pre-prepare the child for this, you can pull up the menu before you get to the restaurant, and you can have the child do a arts and craft activity. And they can create these Pictionary cards where they pick out the items that they want off of the menu, and they put them on these cards. And so that way, when they get there, they'll have the pictures of what they want from the menus, as well as the name of the items that they want off the menus. So that way, when the waitress or waiter asks what they like, they can pull out their Pictionary cards, they can show the waitress or waiter, and they can read it and let them know what they would like. Something else that could happen is that the child may be allergic to an ingredient in the dish that they picked off the menu. And so beforehand, you can have the waiter or waitress ask the child a forced choice question in order to have the child get some more speech going while they're out at these restaurants. And let's say the child's allergic to pickles. And so if they're ordering a burger, you can have the waitress or waiter ask, would you like pickles or no pickles on your burger? And the child would, of course, say no pickles because they're allergic. And you also can have the child create with those Pictionary cards an allergy alert card. So that way they'll have their card ready with the allergy that they're allergic to in case they're having trouble speaking. And then it'll also help them give it to the waitress or waiter as well for when they are at a restaurant. The final scenario was running errands, and in this situation, let's say the child needs help finding where an item is located and they're having a hard time approaching and trying to ask for help from a sales clerk that's there. And so in order to help troubleshoot this, you can, as the parent or caregiver, you can demonstrate this with the child. So when you're in a store, you can walk up to these clerks or sales associates and say, excuse me, or the common phrases that are used when you're interrupting to help you find items at a store. And you can have the child watch you do this. And then when you feel as though like the child has seen it multiple times and you feel like it's time for them to go, you can have them attempt to try to practice this with a sales clerk, and then they can practice interrupting them and trying to find an item in the store. Something else that you can do is you can teach the child scripts. So in order to make this more creative and fun, you can create flashcards, and they can have their flashcards with the ring around the flashcards, and they'll have them with them when they go to the stores. And you can have common phrases of requests that happens when you go to run errands, such as, I need help finding, or excuse me, can you help me find me? Or excuse me, do you work here? And then on the flashcards, it would be underlined. So that way, depending on what they're looking for when they're running errands in those places, the child would fill in the blank out loud with the item as they say it and read it from that flashcard. And this concludes our presentation. We would like to now ask if anyone has any questions pertaining to the material that we went over.
So we had some questions come through, and they were really important and great questions to be asking. There is a question that we haven't gotten a chance to answer yet, and it's about rewards. And we thank you so much for this question. The question is, can we talk more about selecting appropriate rewards? I've tried small things like stickers, big rewards like favorite toy, but nothing seems to work. Instead of being motivating, it seems to make the child more frustrated because they end up not being able to talk and not get the reward. I think so many families can relate to this. You're really thinking about, what is the most appropriate step for your child to be working on. And no matter how big the reward is, you can give me $1 million. I'm still not going to go to a cat cafe because that is my biggest fear, to be around cats. So thinking about if the task is too big, really trying to break it down into a smaller step. So maybe instead of your child answering the person, they answer you in front of the person that they're encountering. And when thinking about rewards, sometimes when it seems like I get the reward or I don't, it can feel pretty tricky. So finding ways to give lots of opportunities for reward. So when you're at the store, great walking in, brave body, great eyes to eyes, thanks for telling me that in front of so-and-so. And so maybe there are 10 small body related exposures or speech related exposures that can work up towards getting a reward, or even just breaking down the reward into a smaller step. So if it's your favorite toy, maybe once you get 1 sticker or 1 star, you get to take a trip to Five Below, and then you get to put the cart in, the item in the cart, and then it gets to be at home. And sometimes even families do renting the toys or renting time doing activities they like. So you don't get the toy right now, but for each exposure that you do, you get 1 hour with it each day. So really just finding some ways to break it down. Chloe, Takira, anything else to add to that?
I would just say I completely agree with your ideas, Lindsay, and that at camp, when we're talking with the counselors, like we're always emphasizing that no matter what, every child is getting their reward that day. And the child, like, no one is left out. And so what you were saying, Lindsay, like if that means that we have, 10 kids that are successfully speaking to the guests and one that isn't, they're still getting the reward. We're just adapting the task so that they are able to get closer to that reward. So if your child knows that no matter what they're earning the reward and you're making sure that the level is appropriate for them, maybe that'll help remove some of that negative association with rewards.
Mm-hmm. We got another great question. Thank you, Kristen. The question is, what if your child is not willing to attempt the exposure? For example, with the zoo example, if I say, no, we can't run around, we need to do our exposure, I'm going to get a shutdown and feel like I'm shaming my child into this. Thoughts on how to help them want to practice exposure? Takira or Chloe, is anything coming to your mind? Otherwise, I can jump in.
I'm thinking about how a lot of times we'll talk about using like active and energized kind of elements and that's part of what we're talking about in this presentation too, right? Like being playful and making things playful. And I know Lindsay sometimes will speak about like a example that she's used with M&Ms where you're running back and forth to the person that you need to talk to, and then you race back to the parent and tell them your answer and you're earning the M&M. I have a client who we've done kind of speed walking races in the hallway since I'm in a school, and that helps them get some of the energy out. And we're not thinking about the speaking task every step of the way toward the person we have to talk to. It's more fun on our way to get there, and some of that like competitive nature is mixed in.
I really like that. And something I'm also thinking about too is, if your kid is fast, you don't want to be playing chase and you don't want it to be a big power struggle. So maybe there is one exhibit that is indoors, that is contained, that not too many people are there. Maybe you start with that or you end with it, or maybe your exposure is in the actual gift shop where the child is motivated to get the item that they want. So thinking about where in the zoo and what time is your child going to be most successful and to have more constraints around it. I know a lot of times we think about playgrounds as being great exposures, and for many kids they are because they can connect with peers. But sometimes a family needs to start with a one-on-one play date when they're in the basement and there's not too many places to run around. Thank you for that question.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to do a quick time check that we have about 15 minutes left of the presentation.
Thank you so much. We've got another great question. What happens if the younger child has a tantrum? They throw themselves on the ground and yell during the group interaction. Chloe, Takira, any thoughts on this? Otherwise, I can jump in. So this is so hard, right? Because it's common when we have an anxious response, we do tend to see fight, flight, or freeze. In many ways, we often think about selective mutism as only being a freeze response, but sometimes we also get that fight, or we get the flight, running away. And it really is a signal that your child is experiencing distress. We always have a plan B as an option. So if you're at a store or if you're on the soccer field, wherever you are, if the child is having a tantrum, if you can, move over to the side. We call that a sidebar, where you move over to the side, you provide some encouragement and some acknowledgement that this is a scary situation. You can practice the exposure and then go back to the group. The idea is we don't want to stop the exposure because the child is tantruming, but we temporarily pause it, regulate, and then return right back to it. Anything else to add on that, Takira, Chloe?
And I'm responding to a couple typing because I know we have so many good questions. So yeah, just so people know, some of them are coming through.
Great. So we've got another question. This one is about teens, and I think it's so important that we raise the topic about how to support our teens. The question is, what do you do if your teen is asked a question and they just freeze? So at a theme park, the ride operator asked how many people were in the group, didn't respond, and waited for somebody else to do it. It's so tricky because these are such quick interactions and there's no warm-up period necessarily with that speaking person. And if you're in a theme park, you likely have a huge line behind you, so it may increase that feeling of pressure. So we always want to think about that VDI sequence, the verbal directed interaction. So asking a question, making sure there's 5 to 15 seconds before the question gets repeated by the other person, and an additional 5 to 15 seconds. So this is fast paced and you may not have a chance to get that practice in, but if possible, you can say to the operator, go ahead and ask that question again. You know, do you have 2 people in your party or 3 people? So maybe rephrasing it as a forced choice question and then letting the person know, hang on just a few seconds. You know, my teen is going to answer, but they just need a little bit more time. And again, thinking about what's the lowest stress situation. So if you're going to a theme park and there's 10 rides that you're going on, which one doesn't have a ton of people and they're still going to ask that same question so they can build on success from there. Chloe and Takira, any other thoughts on that one? All right. Amazing. I love these questions. The next question is, my daughter has SM since age 3.5 and is now 8. She started being verbal to a few friends after Kurt's camp in January 2023. She has been verbal for 1 year and mute for approximately 5 years, so more years of her life. Do you have any suggestion on tips for how to teach her to socialize, asking other friends to play with her, and she is not picking up social cues? Also, what other exposures do you suggest in the school setting? Number one, congratulations on that full year of increasing speech. Clearly, you're working super hard and your child has made so much progress. You're really working on advanced skills now. So not just answering questions, but also initiating, being the one to ask friends to play, and also the social skills of how do I know when to change a topic or suggest that I want to play something else. So this takes practice. We think about skills as being a muscle. And so now that you're in the post-speaking stage, really trying to focus on one social skill per week. So maybe the first one is eye contact, you know, looking at people when they're talking. Maybe the following week is when somebody asks you to play, you say yes or no thanks. The third week can be coming up with different ways to invite other friends to play, like play with me or can I join you? So really breaking it down into smaller steps to address all of the complexities of social skills. Great question that we've got next. We heard the Selective Mutism camp is quite helpful. Can you help to share what's the difference between the camp and regular therapy. Amazing question. You know, usually we think about camp as being soccer camp or recreation camp. Selective mutism camp is therapy with other kids who also experience selective mutism. And typically at camps, it is 20 to 30 hours of therapy in a single week versus 20 to 30 hours over 20 to 30 weeks. So typical therapy is once weekly, you know, for about 45 minutes to 60 minutes, whereas at camp, the focus is on practicing speech with the help of an adult who's aware of their goals while engaged in camp-like activities and school-based activities, recess, lunch, cafeteria, and lots of rewards and praise throughout. Chloe or Takira, anything else about camp versus therapy?
I mean, I think one, and you spoke to this, but like when I think of therapy, it's more individualized, and camp is a great way to have your child also witness like where other kids are at with their success. And that can be really motivating for them to see like, oh, look, I see other kids are, you know, being brave and talking to this guest. And so I'm going to try that too. So it has that really helpful social piece to it that can be a great addition to individual therapy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a unique experience to be amongst other same age people who are working as hard as they are and facing the same challenges. We've got another question. Is it normal for kids to go back and forth? Sometimes they're really excelling, then out of nowhere, they stop again. What are triggers that cause this? I would say absolutely yes. There are natural ups and downs in emotions, and there's different things that happen in different months. There's changes like the start of a school year can lead to a little bit of a slip or setback, often after days out of school and then transitioning back into school can be tricky. Sometimes kids are just tired. They've been working so hard for so long on their speaking goals that they kind of lose a little bit of momentum. I also tend to see that once we start working on the more advanced goals, you have to really change the reward system and bring the fun back into the exposures. So thinking about, you know, is there a different reward that they want to work towards? Is there a way to make it game-based or fun-focused? And really just normalizing it for your kids, saying like, sometimes I feel less talkative than others. And it seems like, you know, maybe there's things that we can do to support you in getting back towards your goals. We've got another question. Any suggestions for exposures in a school setting and getting your child to feel more comfortable in school? Takira or Chloe, any thoughts on that?
I have some thoughts. For this one, you can use the fade in and fade out. And so if your child has any peers or anyone they feel comfortable with playing at school, you can have them play games together and use similar terminology and to help the child feel more comfortable. And once they feel comfortable with, let's say, playing a game with a peer they feel comfortable with, then they can have others slowly join in and be around them instead of like saying anything first. They just observe them playing the game and then they'll slowly start to integrate within playing the game with the child, and then hopefully the child can start playing along with the other peers outside of the one they feel comfortable with, or just doing different types of during that time when they're in the school setting.
That's a great recommendation. And Selective Mutism Association does have tips, handouts on how to do the fade-ins within the school. There's a question on, you know, my child is verbal at times, nonverbal at others, back and forth. How long do you keep your patients on an SSRI? So an SSRI is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Common ones are Zoloft or Lexapro. These are first line of defense medications when it comes to anxiety. None of us are medical providers, so we can't specifically provide guidance. However, many of the families that I work with, once they start a medication, they typically are on them for a period of a year or 1 year of general stability in being able to maintain progress. And it typically takes about 6 months or a year as they're slowly weaning off with the support of a psychiatrist. So this kind of helps them through the ups and downs and natural changes over the course of the year that may contribute to more or less anxiety. Just a few more minutes left, working on our next question. Thank you again so much for these. Our 13-year-old daughter started to talk, but only when we are not there. She refuses to speak in front of us. Any suggestions? Number one, congratulations on this success. It is really huge for a teenager to be motivated to do the brave work, especially when their parent is not there. This is very common. They have practiced so much over the years of not talking when they're with you, just because you're often with your kids as they're growing up. So what you can do when you are there is kind of be invisible, pretend like you're not there, pretend like you're engaged or busy. So when they are talking, for example, at the library, you could be on your phone or you could be slightly further away. So rather than expect to have the same level of speech with you there, you kind of want to build back up to your teen speaking to other people while you're a little bit further and as you're getting a little bit closer, or while you're not very engaged and attentive to kind of being right there and fully engaged. And our last question, that we probably have time for. So question, is there any training or camp for young adults? That is a fabulous question. I'm not sure. I know that there are programs that specialize in adolescents. For example, Confident Kids Camp in Michigan has one. Also, We Speak is designed for teenagers. And so I don't know, Kristen, if you have any awareness of any young adult camps for selective mutism.
Nothing that you didn't just mention that I'm aware of. If I think of anything, I will send it out to the group.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So somebody had their hand raised during the presentation. Okay, we got an answer. Dr. Kurtz Camp, New York. Seems like there's a program for young adults. So thank you for that. And we are at time. So thank you so much, everybody. I'm so sorry if we didn't get a chance to address your question. The folks at Selective Mutism Association are so kind and generous, and the community as a whole is, with knowledge and information. So if there's any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out. Contact information is on the slide, or you can reach out to Selective Mutism Association directly. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you to Takira and Chloe for your great work today. Take care,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone. Take care.
Everyone.